So this is reducing, reducing deer damage. It's not getting rid of it because getting rid of deer damage is very difficult unless you live in a city. And even these days, if you live anywhere but downtown, you still have the option to have deer running around your yard with all the building and new developments everywhere. The deer have less and less wild places to go, so they decide to come in and look at our yards and see what we have. So anyway, I love this picture with that little deer sticking his tongue out at us like, oh yeah, you think I'm not going to eat your yard? So they have to eat, but we want to try and have them eat something other than our own gardens. We want them, deer get into a habit of going from one place to the other. They actually have like circuits that they roam through. And you want to have them not like your area more than they like your neighbors. So you want them to not like yours and like your neighbor's yard, or at least go in a different direction from your area. So there are things we can do. You have to usually try out what works best for you. We'll see. Here you've got some of the things you can do. I basically do plants because that's just, I have not able to do most of the other things, but there are lots of repellents because they do have a very good sense of smell. So you can use a lot of different things we'll talk about for repelling them through smell. Lights, there are all these really interesting little contraptions that have lights and spray, and they're motion activated. They have sounds with them. And fences. There are some fences that you can put up that will keep them out. I have a friend that has basically fenced her entire property in, and it's a large piece of property in the woods, but it pretty much keeps them out. It's a 10-foot fence. It's not obtrusive. It's see-through. It's very nice, but it is expensive when you put up a fence like that. But if you have a lot of beautiful plants, it's sometimes very worth it. The one up there in the top right-hand corner is from my kitchen window. And she is munching on a weed, but she also took care of my daylilies that are on that slope the next day. I thought maybe I'd gotten away with it, but she decided she wanted my daylilies. So the first way of really making sure you get your deer out of the way is fencing. The best fencing you can get is a privacy fencing like the one in the top left. A solid wood fence that's at least 8 feet tall. Deer don't know what's on the other side of that fence. So they're not going to jump it unless they are secure in what's going to be on the other side. That is a technique on the next slide we'll talk about a little bit. So this one doesn't have to be the 10 feet that most people say you have to have for deer. This one can be a little bit shorter, but not a whole lot, because a deer it's amazing to see deer run full tilt and be able to jump over something that's 6 or 7 feet tall. The guy in the middle, I see this a lot because I live out in the country and I have a horse farm next to me. And I have seen mom, dad, and babies running across my field, jump my short little 4-foot fence, and then go over the 6-foot fence that my neighbors have without even breaking stride. The mom and dad just hop right over it and no issues. The one on the bottom left is an electric fence. That helps, but in this picture, one of the things you have to look at is that bottom row is not very close to the ground. So when mom and dad jump over the top of this fence, little babies just scooch right underneath it. They don't even break stride. I mean, it's just amazing to watch them, and I see it not regularly, but I see it enough. So this fence is a great one, but it needs to have another row at the bottom to help keep the deer from crossing over that. On the bottom right, you have, that's just, get this off the internet. There are dozens and dozens of enclosures that you can build, you can buy. There's some modular ones, ones that have doors. If you have a specific area you want to keep away from the deer, like a garden plot or your prize roses, this kind of thing can really make a difference. It's not really bad to look at because the black sort of blends into the background. And they have doors. This one I think was 10 feet tall, if I'm not mistaken. But there are lots of, and you can, like I said, you can get panels where you can make it any size you want. They have ones made out of metal. They're, of course, more expensive, but this is that plastic netting that goes over the poles. You can do the chain link fence like in the middle where they're looking through that, but that does have to be high. When they can see the other side, they're not as afraid to jump something that's tall. They go, oh, I can land in that spot, and so they'll try it. On the top right hand are some things. They're not really fencing as such, but they're protection for your young trees or young plants. Deer will come up and rub against them, and they can make a mess of a tree in short order if they're not protected. The one on the right will actually protect it from rabbits and voles because it comes all the way to the ground, but it's solid, so you have to be careful not to leave it there too long because you can get too much moisture in there along the trunk of the tree. The one on the left one is a metal circle that goes around the trunk, so there's airflow, which is much better, and that'll keep the rabbits away, but it won't keep the voles away. So here's some more types of fencing. The bottom left is what you feel like you need to do sometimes to protect your plants. I just thought that was hilarious. Have the little lookouts and checking out for deer. And I think those poles are, I think they said they were like 15 feet tall, and they're pointed at the top. So that's even better. The one on the left, well, let's talk about the one on the bottom right first. That is a great way to deter deer from jumping shorter fences or any fence, because those shrubs that are right behind the fence go up tall enough that the deer can't see over them. So again, they're not real sure what's on the other side. They don't know whether it's more plants or a drop off or something that's hardscape. They don't know what's over there. So if they can circumvent around and go to someone else's property that doesn't have this nice fence with the screening shrubs behind it, they're more likely to go somewhere else. And you hate to say, well, they can go to my neighbor's house, but they can go to my neighbor's house, and then they can put up a nice fence, and then they can go to their neighbor's house. But that's a lovely way to get a screening if you want to screen your neighbors and keep the deer away from wanting to be on your property. With fences, though, especially things like the chain link fence and the electric fence, if you live in an area that has an HOA, you've got some issues there. So you can talk to them about what your requirements are. Maybe you can only do it in your backyard. But that's, unfortunately, with HOAs, they don't really worry about our plants. They just want everything to look the same. On the top right is a lovely fence. It's a bright color. It's that pretty red, which is going to not scare the deer, but it's going to make them more aware of it. But these people have also planted a lot of nice tall things behind that fence. So again, the deer can't really see what's on the other side. The only problem with a lovely screening like that is if they don't plant the right plants, the deer can just walk down the fence and lean over and snack on whatever happens to be within their very long neck's range. I had that happen to my fence last year. I have a lot of Oriental lilies along the back of my fence line. And the deer came and ate every single one of them, just took off the tops of all of them, except stargazer. So I had about 6 stargazers, and for some reason they did not touch them. So it'll be interesting to see if stargazer tastes different or something. But if you plant plants along the back of this fence line that the deer are not going to like, salvias and things that have a lot of fragrance to their leaves, they're more likely to leave it alone. On the left-hand side, I just thought that was a lovely picture. It's an interesting fence. It's tall, but it has varying heights. So again, that will confuse them a little bit. They're not sure what area to go through. They also have nice plantings behind it, so they can't see past that. But then they put this bench in front, which is a technique that you can do with fencing, which is where you would put a short fence in front of your area, maybe 6 feet in, you'd put a tall fence because the deer can't jump the small fence and then get enough height in that short distance to get over the second fence. So again, that's expensive, but it is a good way to keep them out. This bench is going to do something like that. Now it's only in that one area, but that bench is out in front, so the deer are not going to be as likely to jump both the bench and the fence and the plants. Now, obviously, you can't put a bench the whole line of the fence line, but in an area where you may have, you know they're coming through, that this is where they're jumping over your regular fence, you might be able to put something like that that's decorative and pretty and helps keep the deer out of your way. Plantings are what I do most because I have such a larger area that it's just not within my realm to be able to do that. We have a list. I'm not sure whether you're able to get it online, of our newly updated deer in the landscape handout. We just revised it, updated it, put a lot more plants on it, it highlighted the ones that are native plants. So that's a great list. It's a really intense list. There's not everything, of course, but and at the end of this, I have a QR code that worked for me. You can take a picture of it, and it will take you to the handout. I think, Blake, were you able to send that handout in the chat?
Yeah, I just got the link to where people can find those resources in the chat.
Okay, excellent. So they're going to be in your gardens. You just want to try and find plants that you can intersperse with the ones that you particularly like, but you know that the deer eat, so that you can protect them a little bit. The list has tons of beautiful plants, both shade and full sun, so there's lots to choose from. I like putting some of these plants in front of other plants because they're not going to want to step on the ones that smell funny to get to your other plants. So on here, it talks, first of all, over fertilizing, which is something some people do. And that gets your plants to grow more, and you have the nice soft growth, and the deer are much more likely to eat that soft growth than a full grown leaf that has gotten used to the sun and toughened up a little bit. I had a evergreen oak that I planted last year, and this year when the new little leaves came out on it, they were eaten. I had forgotten to put my cage around it, and excuse me, and they, of course, found it immediately. Now it recovered, but it's set back because instead of just continuing to grow, it had to put out new leaves. But so don't over fertilize plants. If you're mulching and doing those things well, you probably don't need as much fertilizer as you think. Deer don't like some things. This is not a guarantee that they won't eat it. Prickly things, things with thorns, really tough leaves, anything that's aromatic, like all the salvias. Herbs are great because they don't like those smells much. And for some reason, they don't like ornamental grasses. I don't know why, but they seem to not like them. They do have an excellent sense of smell. They don't visually, they don't see quite as well as you would think they would, but they can smell very well. So some of the things that you can use are repellents. There are tons of repellents out there, but if you can pick one of those, and they have to be, again, you have to not recycle, but you have to cycle through some of these things. If you put out your Irish Spring, that's just the one that everybody talks about. And after maybe a month, you might want to put out a different smell, put out some of the liquid repellents. And when you do that, you need to switch liquid repellents because they might get used to that one smell, along with other points that you can do to keep them out of your yard. But they also say bags of hair. That's an interesting one. It never really says whether it's human hair or your dog hair. I would imagine both of them would work fine. Then there are other different kinds of repellents, the ones you can get in the stores. All of these next slides are taken off of the internet. There is no rhyme or reason. It's just, I picked them out. There are dozens and dozens of different types of repellents that you can choose from, see which one you think is going to work best for you. Some of them are organic, some are not. Some have different smells to them. Some are supposed to be completely organic. So you'll have to look for yourself and see what you think is going to work for you, and then try it and see if it does, because it may work for you and it may not. So you might have to change it up just a little bit. The one on the left is actually a little container that has the repellent smell inside of it, which is sort of nice because if you've got little kids or dogs in the yard, they're less likely to get into that. The one in the next one to that is actually just granular that you can spread around. Then the last three are liquid that you will put in a sprayer and spray your plants. Most of the time, they will tell you that after a rain, you need to reapply. And we have such heavy dew. I don't know about y'all this morning, but it was like it had rained last night on all my plants. They were sopping wet. So it's always a good idea to have it around and spray your plants that you particularly want to keep safe. Here are some recipes and where they came from. They're very interesting. Most of them said that when you have just the egg and the water or one more ingredient, but after one more ingredient, it just gets to be too much. And it's not as effective as if just you use the eggs and the gallon of water, which I thought was very interesting and not that expensive that way. Now, here are some more fun things. These are scare tactics. These 4 actually spray water, so you have to be able to hook it up to a hose, but they are motion activated, and some of them actually move a little bit. As you can see, one has a electric, so it's electrified. There's one that's solar powered. Others have batteries to them. So if it's far away from the house, you're probably going to want something that's solar or battery operated. If it's closer, you can use the electric. But they're all very different. They all have different heights. Some of them you can put up higher and lower, just lots of different things that, again, you've got to research it and see what fits your situation. Some of these are very expensive and some of them are not very expensive at all. So again, I just pulled these off because they all look different and had different qualities about them. Then you can get into noise. Some are ultrasound sonic, some have just beeps or loud noises that will hopefully scare the deer. Some of them have flashing lights. and some of them are combined. The two on either side definitely have the lights and the sounds. Again, if you're out in a neighborhood with close neighbors, or if you're in an HOA, sometimes the noise may bother your neighbors and you may not be able to use that. It may bother you too if it's always going off in the middle of the night. But again, there are lots of different kinds. And then they even have some that look like predators, where they have the colored eyes that will flash along with sounds. So you can try all kinds of things. I have talked to people that like these with the flashing. I had a friend that loved the water squirter. Whenever she was able to keep her peas and beans from being eaten because she had that hooked up next to her garden. So there are lots of things to check out, and using a multi-pronged and to this, trying to see whether you can get sounds to scare them away, and then smells so that they don't want to come anyway, fencing to keep them out, and then change it up. If you have the sound or the lights in one spot, after a couple of weeks, move it to a different spot, because the deer are going to get used to that. Oh, well, he's not coming after me after all with those bright orange eyes. So they are not worried about it anymore. But if you change it up a little bit, move it around, change the tones of the sounds, you can hopefully keep them distracted long enough that, as we said, when they get a pattern going around, if they are scared from yours long enough, they may stop coming by your area and go somewhere else, which is the whole point of trying to keep them away. Do we have any questions right now, or I can just keep going then with the plants?
No questions now. You can go ahead.
Okay, great. So I just go through the handout, and this is in the order of handout. The only thing I don't have are annuals, because I don't have pictures of annuals. So I just have everything else. We'll start off with perennials. And I'm sure you all know most of these, but they're wonderful plants. I have aster on the two pictures there. That is not aster anymore, because they're North American and they're begin with an S, and it's a very, very long word that I can't pronounce, but everybody calls them still asters. And on the right, it's also mixed in with solidago, which is a wonderful native plant that the deer don't like. They just, for some reason, do not appreciate that taste. Yarrow on the top left, that's a great plant. Depends on whether you want to call it a ground cover or perennial, but it can do both. And it comes in lots of different colors and different heights. It's a great one because it does have a funny smell to the leaves. And for some reason, they don't like pulmonaria on the bottom left, which is great because that's a beautiful flower that blooms in the wintertime, in the early spring and late winter. And it has lots of different colors to that. Going into more perennials, the coreopsis is a great one, the thread-leafed one. Echinacea, coneflowers are great. I love them now. I've had trouble with them for a while, but I tried planting just your basic purple coneflower and the white coneflower, and I've had great success with that. Deer never seem to even stomp on them. They're in my pollinator area, and the deer do not go in my pollinator area at all. Now they have tromped in my raised bed that I did not too long ago, but I don't have these kind of plants in there, so I'm going to have to start adding them so that they'll quit putting their paws and scraping up everything in my new raised bed. Gaillardia is a great native plant that is just blooming. It has been blooming on my pollinator garden for at least a month now, and it will bloom off and on until it freezes. And the bottom right is the color that I like the best, but I had that yellow one last year, and it was absolutely gorgeous. It did not come back, but I had planted it late, So it might not have been established well enough. I'll try it again because that was such a beautiful yellow. And again, all year long, I mean, all summer long. All the salvias are good for deterring deer. They don't like that smell. I know if you've been around any of the salvias, you know what that smell is. I like the short ones myself. They're blooming, and some of them have bloomed out. They'll be reblooming in another couple of weeks. Salvias are just great. They're very hardy. They come back. Most of them will come back for quite a few years before they finally don't. Some more perennials. I'm a peony lover. I love them very much. Deer leave them completely alone, including my tree peony and the intersectionals that are the combination of the herbaceous and the tree peonies. Have never touched any of them. Hellebores. There are so many beautiful hellebores, and again, I've never had any of mine eaten. And the nice thing about the hellebores is they're blooming again in the wintertime. The new varieties have a lot of flowers that face up, last for a very long time. That yellow one was one I saw at the open house at Plant Delights last time. Just a gorgeous color. Down at the bottom is oregano. That's drops of juniper. I have not pruned that. Those guys are probably about not quite 2 feet in diameter, and I just planted them last year. They bloom at the end of the summer. Absolutely gorgeous, basically evergreen. And they are just, that's, when I find some more of those, I'll put some more of those along in the fence line. These are on my pollinator garden, but I'll put some of those along the fence line because they're just no trouble. They just keep going. So into the shrubs, on the top right is Elysium. That's Florida Sunshine. That's a great plant. I had one that was the regular, just your species Elysium in my backyard. And when it was little, the deer would come up and rub on it. And it recovered from it. They did it 3 years in a row, and it recovered every year. And it's now big enough that it doesn't bother, the deer don't bother with it anymore. But any of the Elysiums are great because they have that leaf that has that very strong smell to it. The bottom, most people know the Daphne odora, which is a wonderful evergreen shrub. It's a little picky sometimes, but when you get one to grow, and it just, as you well know, it's just fills your yard with that fragrance. Now, I'm trying the one on the left, Daphne tangutia. No, I was going to say I missed it. Anyway, I got that last year at one of the Arboretum's plant sales. And it said that it liked full sun and said that it tolerated more moisture, not damp soils, but more moisture than your regular odora does. And so I thought, well, I'll take them at their word and we'll see if it works. And I planted it in my new bed. And it is a raised bed, but it's not that raised, and it's in full sun. And you know what kind of rain we've had through the winter and this spring. And I thought for sure that it would just pass away. But I took those pictures 2 days ago, and it's in bloom all over. Cute little blooms, not nearly as full as the odora one, but again, it's only a year old. And the smell, it's very good. It's a nice little smell. It's not nearly as powerful as the odora, but a new Daphne that maybe you can put out in the sun a little bit more, which I think is, and an evergreen. You can't argue with that. Some more shrubs, butterfly bush. The new butterfly bushes are mostly sterile, so you don't have to worry about them seeding out all over. A lot of them are kept to 2, 3, and 4 feet without even having to prune much. So, and all the different colors of the butterfly bush, the deer don't like that funny textured leaf. I don't know why they don't like our American beautyberry, the calocarpa, because those leaves they don't smell much and they're very soft, but I have them everywhere and they never are eaten. Of course, I should never say never, but they've never been eaten. Chamaecyparis is not on your list, but that's just like the junipers. They don't like that texture, so they usually leave those things completely alone. Another one I don't know why they don't eat is the deutzia. That deutzia has been there for years. They've never touched it. It's lovely plant. Comes in now has a pink flower on some of the newer deutzia varieties. You've got holly on the bottom left. So many different colors and sizes and shapes of hollies, and the deer don't like them either because they have those little pointies on them, and a lot of people don't like them because of that. But even the rounded leaves of some of the ilex that have the smooth edges, they don't eat that either for some reason. So it's a tough leaf. I mean, if you feel a holly, it's a very thick leaf. Pieris is one that they don't seem to like at all either, which is a great plant for shade into partial sun. Blooms in the very, very early spring and is evergreen. It's a lovely plant. So ground covers, there are a few ground covers. The sedum that I have up there is not on your list, but they don't like sedums at all. I have probably 5 or 6 different large patches of sedum. Bunnies don't eat them, and the deer don't touch them. They might walk through them every once in a while, but they don't eat them. So they're great. Ajuga is another one that is, for some reason, they don't like that. And there's so many different varieties of ajuga that you can pick out whatever you want to match your landscape. In the herbs, thyme is great because it's evergreen and it has the fragrance and they don't touch it. Any of the herbs basically are wonderful plants to have to keep your deer away. Bulbs, the colchicum is a great plant because it has the leaves in the winter into the spring, and they're just about to go away now. Deer don't bother them at all, and when the flowers come out, they look a lot like crocus in this case, and deer don't eat them either. Your lycoris, they have never touched any of my lycoris. I've got lots in the fence line where they have access to them, but they do not eat them, and that's a great plant. And then your daffodils, the narcissus, they also do not bother with them, and that's one of my new favorites of daffodils is this falconet. It's a beautiful plant. Comes out fairly early, lasts a long time, and just glows. That's just such a pretty plant. Some more bulbs. Lily of the Valley on the bottom left. Most people know about that one. Wonderful little fragrance, but the deer, again, seem to avoid that. They don't even really walk through it very much. Hyacinths. Those poor little hyacinths there were in the middle of the woods for several years, unkempt, and the deer never touched them. I mean, and I know the deer walked right past them. The galanthus at the top is a great snowdrops. That's a great one. They leave that alone too. I've never really smelled them, so I don't know whether they have a fragrance, but they just don't bother with them. The bottom right is 3 different things in there. You've got your iris in the back. That they don't touch iris. They'll eat your daylilies. That is their dessert. They love a daylily, but they don't eat iris. And so I have a lot of iris in my fence line that they never touch. Hippeastrum is, most people call it amaryllis, but this is hippeastrum. And as you can see, those blooms are nice and big, and the deer I know have been by because I've seen a tree just shortly beside this one had some leaves taken off of it. But they seem to leave them alone, which is great because that's such a wonderful plant to have. And then the bottom left is some stackies. It's not on your list, but it is a great plant. Stackies, the lamb's ear is on the list. And deer don't touch that either, but this one is one of the little clumping smooth leaved, and I have several in that fence line and they don't touch that. Vines. I'm a fan of Carolina jasmine. It's such a friendly vine. It doesn't bother your plants or your trees. It's not going to hurt anything. And it has a wonderful fragrance to it. And the deer just don't bother with it. It's evergreen, but the leaves are so far apart, maybe they just don't worry about there's not enough to eat there. But that's a beautiful vine if you want something to go over that fence to sort of hide so they won't jump over it. On the bottom is winter jasmine, which is a great ground cover or vine, if you want to call it a vine too. It runs along the ground and it will root wherever it touches the ground. Plus, in the wintertime, instead of being brown stemmed, it has green stems so that it doesn't look like it's a dead patch of sticks. The grasses, for some reason, they don't like grasses, and that's a wonderful thing. Miscanthus is not on your list, but it's also very deer proof. They don't munch on it at all. The muley grass is, you would think that soft plume would be something they would like to eat, but they don't eat that. There's also a white variety of the muley grass that is really, really pretty. Carex, they leave that completely alone. And there are lots of different varieties and forms of carex that you can line your beds with that they may not want to step over. And then there are lots of ferns. I think in the notice that Blake sent out, it said something about until they learn to like your ferns. And that made me very sad that they might learn to like my ferns, but they could very well learn that. We have a lot of nice native ferns that are great. And again, the deer don't like them. They just don't. So let's hope they keep not liking our ferns. I did have, normally I would say that viburnums are completely deer proof, but that was not true this fall. I planted viburnum superbum, and I didn't get my cage around it because I wasn't worried because they've never touched. I have dozens of different types of viburnums in my yard and front and back and everywhere, and they've never been bothered. But the next morning when I came by to see how my newly planted viburnum was doing, it was missing all of its outer leaves. And I was so depressed. I said, well, I can't say that viburnums are safe. So, but they're pretty safe because, like I said, I've got lots of viburnums and they never, until I went to my superbum. Trees, there are lots of nice native trees and a lot of pretty trees that you can get that the deer are not going to eat. Now, when they're young or sometimes when they're in a sort of a medium growth, they will use them to rub on. I have a picture. Well, I'll show you. I'll tell you about that. But again, here's more holly. These are more the tree forms. The birds love the berries, but the deer don't seem to like the plant. I've got a little red buckeye that has never been bothered. I have a neighbor that has a lot of the buckeye in her yard, and they're large and they've never been touched. Pretty plant with those pretty red blooms on it. Prunus mume, most all of the prunus, all your cherries seem to be something they don't like to have lunch on. So any of the prunus are usually a good shot for trees. I like Prunus mume myself. That's one of my favorite. The crepe myrtle at the bottom, they don't bother those. Again, they can rub up against them occasionally, but they don't eat any of them. And osmanthus, which is a huge, wonderful group of plants. Again, they never bother with them. Gorgeous plant. You can get them in all different kinds of sizes. I'm a magnolia person. I love magnolias. As you can see from this picture, I've got lots of them. They do not bother with the magnolias at all. The evergreen one at the top left is really beautiful. Never been snacked on. And all of the tulip type have, again, and star magnolias have never been bothered by deer. And those are such pretty, all the different colors and shapes. There's a Magnolia Lois on the left-hand side that's also never been bothered. Then my Magnolia grandiflora, the southern magnolia on the right, that poor tree, when it was little, the deer did come up and rub on it and broke off several limbs from it. And it's grown back, but I learned to go to the dollar stores or something like that and buy the little wind chimes, the little cheap little wind chimes, and I just put them on the outer limbs when I know they're going to be coming through, and that stopped them from messing with my my magnolias. And actually, I did that on the Elysium in the backyard. After about the third year, they had abused that poor plant, and it kept them away from that. In the middle on the top is my new favorite plant. That's a live oak. You can see it's a little baby. We just planted it this fall. I won't be around, I'm sure, to see it being big and beautiful, but at least maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, I can get to see it being a nice tree. I've always wanted a live oak. And they don't like oaks pretty much at all. They like the nuts, the acorns off of the oaks, but they're not big on actually eating these oaks. Of course, I just said that they ate my evergreen oak, but that was because it was the new growth coming out on it, and they ate that. On the bottom is the black gum tree, which is a beautiful native plant. It is so gorgeous. This one is Green Gable, and it has that nice shape, but they are up there all the time because this is in the top part of my property, and there are deer there all the time, and they never bother that plant either. And then, of course, it's beautiful in the fall. So here are a couple of pictures of things together. This is my pollinator garden. On the right, you can see that's thyme. There are 2 white echinaceas in the middle. There are the gaillardias, and orange gaillardias there. Then back here on the right is a nepta. We didn't talk about neptas yet, but nepta catmints are wonderful plants. They have, I think, a nice fragrance. And they bloom constantly, wonderful for pollinators, but the deer really, they don't go into my pollinator area. But that's just so pretty. And then I have a hibiscus back in there. So I learned a lesson last year, and I'll pass it on. I planted 3 neptas in a grouping, and then down halfway I planted another 3, and then at the end I planted another 3. So I am lazy. I don't like cutting things back. I just figure, it'll go away and something will eat it, and I'm happy with that. But this year, when my nepta came up, and it's been blooming because these pictures I took, again, just this past week, this nepta has been blooming for at least a month. But as it got taller and taller, it finally sort of splayed itself out. You can see this ring around the 2 plants here. There's a third one over here, but you can see how that ring has just formed because it's fallen over. But in the center, the new growth has come up. So I should have cut this all off in the late fall or the very early spring so that it didn't flop over. But I had this beautiful flowering. Pollinators were happy. So I think next year, this fall, what I'm going to do is cut back 2 of them and leave 1 in the grouping of 3 so that it will bloom early and be there for the pollinators. But then as soon as the other 2 start to grow up and begin to flower, I'll cut the other one back so that they don't get that halo of course, it's pretty. It's halo of purple. And then down here is another view. This is Coreopsis nana, which I just really think that's a great little plant. It's blooms constantly. It's a Coreopsis, so they don't bother it. Lovely little plant. So on the top left is another grouping of different plants together. In the front are alliums. That's millennium. Then there's salvia, that is violet riot, if I'm not mistaken. And then with the iris in the background. This is something that the deer are not going to be anywhere near these. The bottom right is Osmanthus fortunii, and on the right were those hippeastrums and the stackies, and then some more iris here, and then back here in this back corner is another type of salvia. So on the top right is outside. This is like the picture before, outside my kitchen window while she was eating away. Like I said, she did avoid, that's leaves in her mouth right there. She did avoid my daylilies that day, but the next day or two, all of these daylilies in here disappeared. So she was teasing me, which wasn't very nice. And then last week on Tuesday, I was looking out my bathroom window and I saw full-grown deer just walking around outside my window and having a good time. They actually sort of kicked up their heels a couple of times. And when it was all done, there were 7 of them that had walked past. And this is a picture, very bad picture because it was through the screening, but of 4 of those deer just having an enjoyable afternoon in my side yard. So this is the end. And here's our contact information for the Master Gardeners. If you are able, you can take a picture of that QR code. Like I said, it did work for me yesterday. I was sort of proud of myself. I'm not technically that great, but I figured out how to do it, sort of. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to talk about it. Or if not, the handout that we have is really very good, has all these lists. It's on the one handout that's just plants. It's 2-sided in pretty small type, so there's tons of plants on there for you to choose from.
Awesome. Well, we did have one question that's come in so far, and anybody else, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them there in the chat. But the question we have first off is, are herbs a deterrent for rabbits as well? Do you know, Cindy?
When I was weeding my pollinator garden, I was underneath a plant and I accidentally had a rabbit's nest in there, little babies in it. So I covered it back up and I left. But obviously I've got a rabbit around there somewhere, and I have never seen any of the herbs. Nepta, of course, I don't put mint in the ground. I know better than that. But I have rosemary, and I have thyme and oregano, basil, and I've never had the rabbits eat that. And so I think you're pretty safe with most all of the herbs.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting that they built a little nest in there, so it's not necessarily a deterrent, but they won't eat them. So,
not that I want her to have babies because that means there are more rabbits running around, but I do have hawks and I do have owls, so that will help the circle of life, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, then Cindy, thank you so much for pulling this talk together for us today. It was absolutely wonderful. I loved the little bit about the little story you told about putting wind chimes on the branches of the magnolia. Because you see so many, like, there's high-tech solutions where there's like lasers, motion sensor things. And it's like, well, hey, wind chimes are also motion sensors. So
they are motion and they are sound, and you can move them around, and they don't understand that they make the noise in the wind and when they're near them. So and for cheap. Sure. You can go to, like I said, to the dollar store and pay $1 for them and buy 10 of them.
And it's nice and gentle. It's not aggressive. You're not shooing the deer away. You're just supplying the world with nice, lovely chimes. It's a beautiful thing. So thank you so much, Cindy, for pulling this together. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for this talk today. We will have another Master Gardener presentation in June, but I don't believe we have the topic for that one set just yet. But that will be on the 26th of June at 10 a.m. So I do hope you will join us for that. And otherwise, I hope we'll see you around the Arboretum. Y'all take care.